Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our new webinar in partnership with PEFC. We are going to walk you through a very important topic when it comes to EUDR compliance. It's the legality risk assessment, essentially. So we're going to walk you through the requirements, how you can satisfy those requirements using our platform by LiveEO called TradeAware, and also in partnership with the PEFC. So with me on stage, you will see Rob Shaw from PEFC and Chris Bell from LiveEO, my colleague, who are going to be speakers, and Chris will be also the moderator of our Q&A session at the end of this call. And so we will touch on both, again, the requirements and the solution parts of legality, and we're going to take your questions. So please feel free to start adding and typing in your questions on the right-hand side of your screen. Chris will moderate that part, and all three of us will answer either in text or we'll talk through the answers so that you're going to get more content out of this. Stay assured that we're going to share with you the recordings of today's webinar, so there is no need to type notes. You can rewatch it, you can share it with your colleagues and friends, and watch it at a later stage. So my name is Piero Marlia. I'm the commercial director for supply chain solutions at LiveEO. I am taking care essentially of customers and partners here, and more specifically, I'm helping them navigate the challenge of EUDR this year and the coming year. Our goal and mission is to make this compliance journey as simple and smooth as possible. Now, as you might know, if you follow this webinar series so far, this is our third appointment. We've already completed 2 webinars when it comes to the earlier stages of the compliance journey, specifically the preparation and import of geodata, which is crucial for the Article 9 evidence collection. And the second part was about the connection between companies using TradeAware, their suppliers, and buyers. Because as we know, a reporting chain is essential to pass information up and down the supply chain and bring to life both geolocations and what we're going to talk about today, which is the legal content, the legal documents, and everything you will need to prove your legal compliance. So that's today's focus. As always, stay tuned because we have more webinars coming up throughout Q4. So in this final quarter of the year, and also, of course, 2025. As we've learned, the compliance journey has been extended. Now, if you're wondering where the past webinars are, you can scan these QR codes. You can click here, and you can rewatch the past episodes, not to miss the important content on evidence collection and the creation of your reporting chain with suppliers and buyers. Now, elephant in the room, you must have learned that all of us have more time to comply. So the larger companies have until the end of 2025 to work on their compliance solution. And that allows all of us to essentially create a durable, robust solution that can work with your systems. And it probably leaves a lot more breathing room for everybody to do good work. And so you will see in the top right part the article published by the Commission proposing that the EUDR implementation time extends 12 more months. This is not yet fully approved, obviously, by the relevant bodies. So we need to stay tuned in case there are hiccups or delays there. But the tendency now is to extend, obviously, for 12 more months. And then in the bottom right, you will see an article that we published on our website about the essentially the what's in it for you, operators and traders, and suggestions and recommendations of what to make of this extra time that you've all been given. Now, the summary is on the left-hand side. Essentially, the key messages are to stay the course, obviously, engage with your suppliers. You have a lot more time. But we know that the collection of evidence of both geolocation and legal documentation takes time, weeks, in some cases months, for very long, very large supply chains. to make sure also to review the quality of the data you received and carry out proper risk assessments. And today specifically, we're going to see how we help you with the legality part. And then obviously monitor the regulatory updates. We are receiving now new information such as the FAQ or new documentation that at times simplifies the compliance journey, other times instead introduces some requirements that were not maybe super clear in the earlier months. So keep on monitoring the space. Definitely the EU information is where to get this information, and then we re-elaborate and make simplified for operators and traders on our blog. To reiterate, we're hosting this webinar jointly with Rob and the PEFC team because we have a partnership that began already in spring this year, where we combine our requirements, our offering into one platform, which is TradeAware, and we enable essentially the PEFC side of compliance and the EUDR side of compliance all at once with a combined set of requirements. And you can find this essentially joint platform on our website, and you will see a dedicated section that's the PEFC version of TradeAware, where you can satisfy all the requirements and also, more importantly, get a fixed specific price that is only available to PEFC chain of custody organizations. And they are divided by tier of PEFC relevant revenue, so timber revenue. And in case your organization goes beyond the upper threshold, then it becomes a contact us eligible type of discussion where we go through your needs and try to customize the offer to what you need. Now, enough talking from my side. I want to hand it over to Rob to talk about what's happening with PEFC. With regards to the EUDR delay and all the other new information when it comes to legality. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Piero. Apologies in advance, everybody. I'm suffering from a rather heavy cold today. You'll see on screen here just some specifics from me in terms of our chain of custody modular standard. We'll be sharing these slides afterwards, and you can also be able to watch the recording. In terms of the chain of custody standard and where we are at now, inside the European accreditation area or EA area, and if you click on the link in the shared slides, it will take you straight to the European accreditation website and show you all the countries which are involved, which is bigger than the European Union. It's European geography. We are required under the accreditation process to go through what's called an EA 1/22 accreditation process. That's now at the technical review stage. So if you are a certified chain of custody organization in the EA area, please register your interest with your certification body if you wish to extend your scope to the PEFC EUDR module for chain of custody. And then we will keep you updated, and your certification body will keep you updated as this accreditation process rolls forward. We are hoping that the technical review will be finished in early 2025, and certification bodies are now preparing themselves to be accredited. And then once that happens, they will then be able to certify you. In stark contrast, outside the EA area, accreditation bodies are already working now with certification bodies to roll out the accreditation and therefore the certification. So we're hoping that some of the first certificates to the extended scope will be realized by the end of this year. Obviously, this is now in the context of the proposed EUDR delay, which Piero was talking about. So in a way, this takes some of the steam out of this situation. Briefly, and this is not on the slide, in terms of sustainable forest management national systems, our international benchmark standard will be voted on in November at our upcoming online General Assembly. And then throughout 2025, we will be aligning our national sustainable forest management systems with the amended benchmark standard to take into account the EUDR content and the 12-month extension to implementation creates a great breathing space for us to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, for those of you who are not aware, the modular standard is already published on the PEFC website. It was published in July, and if you take this extra scope on board as a certified organization and you follow it, then of course you will be aligning yourself with the EUDR regulation wording, because all the work that we've done over the last 18 months is to bring all those requirements into the modular standard. And the modular standard effectively replaces the due diligence system component of our main chain of custody standard. In terms of geolocation and other relevant data, this is why we're partnering with LiveEO, and Chris will take you through in due course the way that the software will work. Next slide, Piero. Thanks. Just very briefly, when you get inside the actual modular standard itself, you can see that it very much follows the standard layout for a due diligence system. The big difference is there are 6 or 7 tables within the EUDR modular standard as opposed to 4 within our main chain of custody standard. And next slide again. And again, just to stress that PEFC itself is not taking any active role in trying to manage the supply chain data, because it's extremely big data sets and very dynamic. What we will be doing at PEFC International is adapting and modernizing our database platforms, and we will be releasing an EUDR specific database and search engine within the next 3 to 4 months. Work is currently underway on that. And so again, the EU proposed delay gives us some extra breathing space to do this better and stronger, and we'll be giving out more information in the coming 3 to 4 months on how that's going to work. And just to finish off from me, this picture just again pictorially gives you a good idea of where we sit. So the sort of work that's going to be going on over the next 13 or 14 months is aligning our national sustainable forest management systems using our international benchmark standard from November onwards, which will mean that a certified material coming out of those forests in 2025, country to country to country, will become EUDR aligned. Whether or not those countries are aligned by the end of 2025, it doesn't matter, because our chain of custody modular standard will be able to take all forms of inputs, that's uncertified, certified by other certification schemes, PEFC non-aligned or PEFC aligned material, and in full alignment with the EUDR regulations, if successful, the material can go through your process and come out with an output claim, which would be PEFC-EUDR. And then this will give you a great strength and seamless and frictionless trade into the European Union or within the European Union. And in actual fact, the European Union guidance is recognizing voluntary certification schemes such as ourselves as being a positive contribution to being in alignment with the regulations. So at this point, I think I'm going to hand over to Chris, and obviously we can take questions in the chat or live in due course. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Just to say as well how great it is to see so many people engaged with this topic, even with talk about a delay. Of course, as Piero mentioned, there's still a lot of work that needs to go in, even with such a delay. So to talk about some of that today, looking at where this all comes from, this all originates from Article 9 of the EUDR. So the idea is that, okay, today you have perhaps the, of course, the product quantity and contact information of your suppliers and your recipients. And what you need to get towards in Article 9 is the geolocation of all the plots of land that you're drawing the product from. And you need to, of course, know the country of production, which flows from that. And then the thing you need is verifiable information on production in accordance with local legislation. we'll take a look at how you get towards some of that, because that is perhaps one of the more complicated factors when we talk about getting to this last point, which is assessing that something is deforestation free within the terms of the regulation. I think it's the thing that tends to be forgotten about, that deforestation free doesn't just mean we have assessed it from a sort of geospatial perspective and seen that there's no deforestation. It also means assessing this compliance with local law. So what does Article 10 say as well? So the idea is that once you get this information under Article 9, you're in the process of doing a risk assessment. So you're looking at, depending on the kind of information you got, you're trying to figure out whether or not there are any risks at face value that you need to be looking at. And then later on, which we won't talk about too much today, but do you need to be looking at then risk mitigations that also flow from that? So Article 9 saying that these documents have to be assessed for compliance risks, and that only those that have no risk of deforestation or negligible risk of deforestation can then be placed on the market. And of course, the need there for things like valid licenses as part of that process, to be getting this documentation on an annual basis and be reviewing it. And then, of course, the need to be able to provide it to the competent national authorities where required. And of course, keep maintaining the audit trail that you need to prove that you did this due diligence work. Because, of course, a lot of this information doesn't necessarily flow into the due diligence statement that gets created and sent to the EU system, but is really a record of that you did the due diligence, that you took that exercise on to check whether or not there were any risks in that supply chain. So how do we think about this in terms of timber products? We think about it from two sides. One is the legal aspect of it. And that's where some of what we'll talk about today with PEFC's standard comes in, is being able to check very much tailored to this industry and to the understanding and knowledge of PEFC. What does risk look like in timber products? Of course, considering the country, we know one of the many things that we're still waiting for clarification on is what the risk levels will be of individual countries, and that has implications for how much work needs to be done in terms of risk assessment. Whether or not there are valid PEFC certified claims, also sort of showing that you've done that, you've done a level of due diligence already, and other certification schemes that might also be relevant there. And that feeds into the legal side, which runs alongside the actual analysis of the land, so which is looking at the land use at the cutoff date, so December 2020, and then looking at changes in that land usage over time to understand whether or not you started off in a relevant class for the regulation and whether you end up in a relevant class for the regulation as well. And that, of course, produces a risk that you can use to decide what you should be doing, whether or not you achieve that non or negligible risk, whether or not the things are just so clear that you there's a significant risk and you don't think you can proceed, or whether you need to be moving ahead with risk mitigation strategies and investigating further. So in terms of the types of questions you might be asking there for legality, aside from being able to prove this with some of the PEFC documentation, these are the questions you might be asking. And these can follow quite sequentially so that you don't have to really go through them all if there's an apparent significant risk. So are there concerns about corruption or document falsification in the country that you're dealing with? Now, this is looking at things like corruption index data, for example. Is the tree species linked to controversial activity? And of course, the existing data that's out there about what types of trees are linked to that, species-wise. Are there any concerns around law enforcement, environmental protection, and then how you can evidence that there aren't concerns there? Any concerns about violation of rights, which of course covers a broad spectrum of land use, third-party labor rights, international human rights law. So quite in theory, a broad spectrum of laws that can be relevant for checking legality here. And then, is there an indigenous population in the country of production that you could be relevant again for checking the risk assessment there? And then, of course, if there is, then has there been a consultation with them? Is there an absence of duly reasoned claims by that indigenous population? And has there been free, prior, and informed consent in terms of the activities that have happened on the land? And then, of course, that leads you to an outcome of arriving at either there is a significant legal risk or there's a negligible legal risk based on assessing those things. And then the other thing you need to consider is, of course, if that is the risk that's posed by an individual source, you need to also be looking at the risk that sources have been mixed. So that's where it comes down to looking at the risk of mixing and circumvention of the regulation based on any mixing that could happen in the supply chain, the complexity of the supply chain, and the sourcing activities that go on there. And also that links again a little to any potential concerns that have been submitted to the EU under the regulation. There's a mechanism of raising concerns to the competent authorities under the regulation and checking that alongside any other public sources, PEF sources that might help to understand whether there's any potential mixing risk there that might be relevant. And then how does that look in terms of what we're building? So on our application, we have a questionnaire that we're putting together that is basically going to take this standard and make it much easier to work with. And so this gives you a view into how LiveEO, alongside providing satellite analysis, as we mentioned, is also helping to incorporate these legality questions, which are, sitting sort of with equal weight with the actual deforestation considerations. So being able to come in here, answer these questions in a structured way, provide any of the relevant data that you can then later provide to auditors. And then, of course, at the end, the ability to complete that and either save it in our system or save it as a PDF that you can then provide on to other people that you're working with in your supply chain, which, of course, looks something like this. So then being able to see the responses to those questions and see the resulting risk that comes with it. So that's, I think, pretty much a summary of what we have to talk about today. So I think it might make sense to now move over into the Q&A. So I can, Rob and Piero, I want to take you through some of the questions that we've had here, perhaps, and we can talk a little bit about some of them. So Rob, I see a question here about the latest FAQs from the EU, that developing a guidance document for certification-related issues. Do you know if there's an expected date for that, and if they are monitoring specific certifications like PEFC?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, everybody will hopefully be aware that the press release about the proposed delay was only released last week. In fact, I was in the LiveEO offices in Berlin when the press release was released last Wednesday, I think. The EU have committed to releasing a series of information packages, and I'm afraid I am just back from some holiday. I know from my colleagues that the guidance document has not yet been released, but we are monitoring the situation on a daily basis. So as soon as it is released, we will be pushing that news through the PEFC network. And of course, you can now sign up on the EU website implementation page to news alerts. So I would recommend to everybody that you go to the EU implementation page. I'll try and paste in a link to that. And there is now a newsletter and news alert sign up function. So that will give everybody up to the minute news updates. Chris, thanks.
Thanks, Rob. And perhaps another one for you here. I think this is You talked a little bit about this at the start, but for those that have obtained a PEFC certificate, does that meet those requirements of EUDR, or is there more that you need to add on top of it?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so anyone who has a normal, what I would call a normal PEFC chain of custody certificate at the moment, and that would be against our PEFC 2002-2020 standard, our main chain of custody standard. Your certificate from your certification body will detail your scope. So your scope is the kind of products and materials that you make or you trade or you manufacture. And now that our modular EUDR standard, which is 2002-1-2024, is released, you should register your interest with your certification body, talk to your certification body contact, and obviously if you're impacted by EUDR, so in other words, you either trade in a supply chain which is EU bound, or you are within the European Union and therefore captured by the regulations, discuss with your certification body about adding the modular standard to your certification scope. And you can either add all of the materials and goods that you trade, or you can just choose the ones which are impacted by European Union trading. So sorry for the very technical answer there, but hopefully that helps people to understand. As I showed in my first slide, the accreditation part of this, which is how certification bodies are allowed to offer this service, is very active at the moment. And so certification bodies will be reaching out to their clients and explaining how the scope extension will go. But in the meantime, certified organizations can start reading the standard. It's free to download from our website, understanding it, understanding what changes they need to make to their management systems and their software, and thinking about whether or not they would like to buy software solutions such as LiveEO TradeAware. So there's plenty of work to do for everybody here, and some of these processes will run concurrently. So if I was a chain of custody manager right now, I would be getting on the phone and emailing my certification body and saying, how can I extend my scope?
Great, thanks, Rob. This one's a little more general, and perhaps Piero, you could also mention on this. There's a question here about, do we have any insights on when the Council and the Parliament will vote on the postponement proposal? Questions there on any confidence about what the outcome will be?
Yeah, we know probably just as much as you. I think you're hinting at end of November, beginning of December. So the time is not really long, but we have not seen a precedent like this of an extension of a legislation of this kind being delayed in such a short time span. So essentially, I do not have more information. Maybe Chris, what your view is around this? Otherwise, my best bet would be around November, December.
Yeah, I think the process is expected to take 6 to 8 weeks. In terms of the processes that the EU goes through. I think, there's been a little conversation here about, is there a chance in that process there's a different outcome? I mean, never say never. I don't want anybody to be watching this recording in 6 to 8 weeks' time and pull this clip out and sort of make me look like I got it completely wrong. But I think we see, the Commission has proposed this. The Parliament is the European Parliament's largest voting bloc is also in favor of this. They proposed it before the Commission did. Actually proposed, I think, a longer extension of 2 years. So I'm not saying this is completely a done deal, but it does very much have that feel about it. So yeah, and maybe a little link to that question. There's also a question here about. If you're in the UK and you're operating within the UK market, whether or not you're also impacted by the regulation. I see, Rob, you've mentioned the new UK deforestation laws there. I think we know that there tends to be a bit of a process of the EU making a law and then it's slowly trickling out to other countries. Is there anything you want to say on that one?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm not an expert on the UK legislation, despite being based in the UK myself. The point I would make, though, here as a general point is there are quite a few companies who believe that they are not impacted by EUDR. But for example, many UK companies will trade with the South of Ireland, with the Republic of Ireland. And of course, the Republic of Ireland is a member of the European Union, and it's still not clear yet whether Northern Ireland will be treated as being inside the customs union and therefore impacted by EUDR. So I would strongly recommend any United Kingdom-based companies to check that none of their products are going into an EU-bound supply chain, either directly or indirectly. Obviously, directly, then they may be an operator, therefore they would be impacted by the regulation, and they need to be very clued up on it. Many companies around the world who are outside the European Union will be impacted by this regulation indirectly. And so they should think about the supply chains that they are involved in, because the message will be coming back down the supply chain from the operator. And the operators will be requesting the geolocation data, the harvesting start and finish dates, and any other associated documentation which we touched on today, to give the operator the assurance that this material is good to purchase. So there will be many people today who believe that they are not impacted, and they will find out during the course of the next 12 months that they are in fact impacted. So just pays to be very aware of where your products are going in the world. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Rob. And Piero, perhaps this question to you. Someone's raised a question here about using some tooling to get information on loss of forest mass and deforestation alarms, and they see that after December 2020, it shows that 70% of the forest mass has been lost. Would that geolocation be invalid? Any thoughts you can add there?
Yeah, definitely. So probably the tools you're using are checking visually whether there has been any change, right, in forest cover. Was there a tree before the cutoff date, December 31st, 2020? Is there no longer a tree? If that change occurred, it's marking that plot of land or pixel as invalid, therefore hinting at non-compliant plot. Now, the situation is not as simple as that, as we know from the EUDR, in particular for timber. I'm not sure what commodity you are growing in those plots, but for timber, the requirement is one of the degradation, right? And we know that obviously there will be a change in the canopy, in the look of the plot, because harvesting activities remove timber, but harvesting activities are most likely legal. And so what our platform does is we do not exclusively look at a picture, although the picture does tell us a lot about whether it is an harvesting activity or an illegal, for example, fire or logging activity. But we'll also look at the documentation, as Chris was touching earlier today, right? So we look at any source of documentation that can reveal whether the entity and organization that uploaded that geolocation had the legal right to own, run, operate, and harvest that piece of land, and whether it's encroaching on indigenous people, and whether that activity is indeed harvesting or it is illegal activity. So solely relying on a pre-post comparison of pictures is insufficient to come up with a conclusion on whether it is compliant or not. In particular, if the data source that you're using it's not geared towards EUDR, and it's only there to check for changes of canopy. That's not what EUDR is about, right? EUDR is about land use change. So whether the piece of land you uploaded was natural forest and it became grown forest before or after the cutoff date. So it's a much more complex question to answer. Therefore, a specific tool is required. Otherwise, the negative consequences definitely that you would be over alerting, as it's happened in your case, which means you would be inadvertently sourcing less of your commodity, therefore have an impact on the revenue side of your business. I don't know if Chris or Rob, you want to add anything on that one, or we're good.
I think perhaps maybe just a little bit there that this question raises the difference between maybe sort of necessary and sufficient conditions around deforestation. It is a necessary condition within the law that there's been a loss of biomass in a sense. But as Piero raises, that's not sufficient to actually say whether or not it's deforestation in terms of the law, because a loss of biomass also occurs for reasons of plantation management, agricultural management. So that's really one of the big challenges of dealing with a lot of analysis around deforestation, is it tends to pick up those events as well. And that's really what we've been focused quite heavily on trying to solve for at LiveEO. Maybe linked to this, there's a question about whether we can provide links to websites to check whether the GPS coordinates given by suppliers are correct. Maybe to speak a little bit on that one, you can sign up today here for our application, where you'll be able to upload coordinates to be able to see whether or not there's potentially any risks against them. I would advise against that, though, that checks whether or not you have any potential deforestation on the land, and then whether or not the GPS coordinates given by your supplier are correct is in a sense another question. And that's something you want to be looking at through the process of the legality assessment. So, you need to ask yourself not just that the data that you have from your supplier, what it shows, but how likely it is that the data is in fact correct. And so that becomes a little more of not just a geospatial problem as we would see it, but also a legal problem in a sense to solve. Perhaps if either of you could answer on this question, I see this is a very interesting one. What would be considered acceptable to actually meet this threshold of adequate and conclusive evidence that products are deforestation free?
Yep. Rob, you want to start?
Well, I was just going to say, thanks for the question. I attended a conference recently where there were several EUDR specialist lawyers in the room, and I'm not a lawyer, and they were saying that the difficulty with some of the words in the regulation is they're yet to be tested. Yeah. And of course, now we have a further 14 months until hard implementation takes place. The thing to remember here, and I'm going to cover a couple of questions further up as well, is that the regulation itself is actually quite narrow in its intent, and it's trying to stop deforestation and or degradation of forests, and deforestation specifically to agricultural use. The other thing to mention is that the EU last week committed to publishing the country benchmarking information by June 2025. And the interesting sentence in their press release was that they said that they expect most countries to be low risk. So sorry for the long answer, but if this is true and the EU does publish the benchmarking and most countries are low risk, then there is a simplified risk assessment route. So that has several consequences in terms of analyzing risk per country, having to present evidence per country, and then the kind of checks and balances that you need to go through. So unfortunately, we're still in a period here of complexity and lack of the full information. I personally, I would say that if people do their best and they choose good systems to work with and they carry out their normal due diligence process and have good visibility on their supply chain, then they're probably going 80% of the way towards alignment with EUDR. The most interesting thing here is when the list of high risk countries is released, is how that knocks on in the real world situation and what the political fallout of that is going to be. So I'm afraid I've answered a question there with a question. We're still playing a waiting game, but sorry, Piero, for the long answer. Sorry.
I think it was an excellent answer, Rob. I would just like to add maybe the practical side of things, so what you can expect to see in TradeAware in terms of risk assessment. So for most commodities, a comparison of today's satellite imagery and the imagery of that plot back on December 31st, 2020, and the verification of whether there was a change in land use, for example, a transition from jungle to a palm oil field, is sufficient proof, evidence, and transparent that shows that there was indeed or there wasn't a change of land use, therefore compliance or non-compliance. An alternative is the upload of a document, for example, in the timber world, a felling license that clearly states that in that region, you as a user were authorized to harvest wood. That also is sufficient and strong proof that you're compliant. So I think you can expect simple ways to provide some an evidence for in case an audit comes through our tool. Anything there more, Chris, or shall we move
No,
on?
I would emphasize Rob's point, which is really interesting about the sort of political wrangling that's still going on. I think it was, aside from the country benchmarking, I think it was very telling what was in the updated FAQs mentioning about what happens if the country you're dealing with doesn't allow the export of geolocation data, and that's obviously it sort of shows that. And the answer was pretty much, you have to figure it out. I think that shows because they're basically talking about predominantly, I think, China in that situation, which bans the export of geolocation data. Then you're in the situation of, okay, there's still a lot of political exercises that need to go on here around the EU has to figure something out with them around geolocation data export, and they have to figure it out they have to figure out the risk benchmarking with the countries. So I think, honestly, as much as a 12-month delay is a delay for the market and for market readiness, I think it's equally as much a delay for the EU and their own readiness as well. And then there's one question here about whether or not the system evaluates validity of legal documents. I would say there that there's some aspects of this in terms of being able to use where the document is in a very structured format. So, for example, where we're taking on PEFC certifications, which do come in a structured format, being able to then pull the data from PEFC's database to be able to check that. For other documents, no, it's not something that the system can evaluate because it would need to be able to read most likely translate and understand many different types of documents and of different legal documents and the implications of those. In that situation, that's really a question for your sort of legal department, legal team, if you need to get into, okay, are these actually valid documents? Anything, Piero or Rob, you'd like to add there?
Yeah, can I just pick up on that, Chris?
Sure.
There are many aspects of EUDR which are not new and in fact build on EUTR, and anyone who is a voluntary certified organization, especially PEFC chain of custody organization, you should already be familiar with working with our standards in terms of risk management, and things like corruption perception index for countries, etc., gives a good indication of whether or not documentation can be trusted in certain countries. And so these features are already, inside our standards. So the chain of custody managers and the risk management teams within organizations will already be familiar with carrying out due diligence. And so the software here is making the sharing of such documentation and evidence more easy, by being able to do one-to-many and many-to-many relationships within the database. And the other thing to mention is that the regulation itself talks about country of production and talks about production. But everyone needs to be clear that that's talking about the forests and where the trees are cut down. the regulation does not then extend all the way up and down the supply chain in terms of chain of custody operations. So people need to read the regulation quite carefully and read the FAQs. And of course, there were, I think, 50 new FAQs published last week, which, by the way, if you download the PDF of the updated FAQs and you type the word new in brackets, you can flick through the new questions quite quickly. This is an evolving picture, but in terms of, and I'm just looking at another question here, in terms of things like looking for human rights violations and other, substantiated concerns, that kind of radar scanning is no different under the EUDR than it was under EUTR or under normal commercial operations. So companies must understand that quite a lot of the regulation wording is focused on the actual harvesting of the trees in the forest and the legality of that situation and the legality of the workers associated with those operations, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I can add something on top there, because I see there's this question from Izan as well as Mauro. They are hinting in the same direction. Essentially, in PEFC organizations larger than the upper threshold where you saw the call to action to contact us, we do offer a qualified legal review of each and every document with our partner network of lawyers that will help you review essentially whichever document has been provided by your suppliers. So in that way, you can rest assured that the risk assessment is performed to the best possible extent beyond what automation and machines can do. So with that, I think we also answered Mauro's question. The latest to have come. Chris, anything else?
Yeah, I would just say that with specifically with PEFC, it's a little bit of a different situation because of the fact that PEFC claims are so well structured and available in a database. So that's something that we are able to then pull the data out for relative to. So in that sense, there's the ability to verify that if somebody has made that claim, that it actually relates to a valid PEFC claim. The other claims they may make when they come in a more unstructured format, that then becomes the challenge for sure. And that's where, as Piero mentions, we've been working with a law firm as well to help to solve for that problem.
Yeah, can I just jump on to the end of this as well? Thanks, Chris. Chris and I are working together on building the platform, and once Chris has finished building it, we will be testing it. But this relationship is ongoing. It's not a one-off. So as the EU issue out more guidance, and as the PEFC database structure develops, we will build in some of these semi-automated verifications. So once I have managed to get the PEFC-EUDR claims database active, then we will create API linkage into TradeAware, and we have a decision tree workflow which will take companies or help companies go through the due diligence process. So if, for example, a company is buying material with a valid PEFC-EUDR claim, then the standard and the software workflows will very quickly run you through the process. And once you've checked for significant concerns, etc., then you'll arrive at a negligible risk outcome. So we are trying to make sure that in the next few months, we build as much automation in as possible.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. And to the last question that's been asked there, that also is a sort of piece of the decision logic that exists there, that as we sort of showed in the slide, these things all run together. So if we're able to say, okay, it originates from a PEFC certified forest, then alongside any of the other questions you might have to answer from a legality perspective, then that helps to prove that you have a standing usage of that land prior to December 2020. And then, our analysis isn't the sort of decisive aspect there. So it's something we are very aware of and accounting for, and how we're putting this process together.
Can I just pick up on Dick's question specifically, because there's 2 or 3 points to tease out of this. As I mentioned earlier, because PEFC has almost 50 national sustainable forest management systems, different systems in each country which are customized to the local environment, we have to go through an alignment process during 2025 to upgrade the national system standards to become EUDR aligned. So when we talk about a PEFC certified forest, material coming out of those certified forests right now will not be EUDR aligned, because the standards have not taken on board the extra EUDR wording. In terms of geolocation data requirements, that is a mandatory requirement for any forest anywhere in the world under the EUDR regulations. So there is no shortcut here to avoid gathering the geolocation data. In terms of whether you need to check that using software and AI, I will defer to Chris and Piero to explain. But the geolocation data is an absolute requirement of the EUDR regulations. And this has been the biggest talking point for the past 2 years. The data sets are going to be enormous. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it's a very comprehensive set of data that you need to be gathering under this regulation. And, it depends which industry you're in and which commodity you're in as to what might prove decisive in terms of helping to, evidence that there hasn't been deforestation. And of course, where you're dealing with an industry like timber with a certification like PEFC, it looks very different to other industries where those don't exist. And so the geospatial data, the certifications alongside, the legal assessment are all these things that help to prove. But as Rob points out, there are also very, perhaps to the earlier question about what is adequately conclusive and verifiable, it's very open in terms of its nature, but there are other aspects that are very hard requirements, very deterministic requirements, and one of those is as Rob points out, the geolocation. So there's a bit of a mix there between those different requirements. So, great. I think that's pretty much all the questions we've had. I know that if anybody has any other questions that they want to send through afterwards, we've got the emails on the screen. Also, there's the QR code there to sign up for either using LiveEO's solution. You can sign up for free to test that out, and also to see more about PEFC and what they're doing on EUDR. Piero, Rob, any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Just one from me, just picking up on that last point. There was a new FAQ issued last week because there's been lots of concern about things like wildfires and storm damage in forests. And of course, these are not that's debatable, but they're not man-made events. They're not human-induced directly. But it does say that it's very important to capture evidence where you are harvesting trees, say from a forest which has been burnt down or a forest which has been blown over, because those forests may not, in certain local jurisdictions, go back as forest. So therefore, the EU checks would throw them up as deforestation. But that's another reason why, regardless of the certification status of the forest, you need to be capturing your geolocation data and having some knowledge about what happens to that forest next. The other point to make, of course, is that certification operates on 5-year cycles. So whilst we would want everybody who is certified to remain certified, that's not always the case. And properties change hands and policies of owners change. So yeah, just another reason for good record keeping, I think. So
absolutely. Piero, anything from your side?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, I think that's us finished then. So thanks everyone for joining, and again, good luck with your ongoing EUDR compliance.
Thanks everybody.
Right. Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Neb. Bye.